3 years after losing my wife, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I had learned how to live alone. I had settled into a quiet routine in the small house we bought together decades ago. Every morning started the same way. I made coffee, watered the flowers she loved, took my medication, and tried to fill the silence that grief leaves behind. The one thing that always brightened my week was a phone call from my son. Every Sunday morning at exactly 7 o'clock, my phone would ring. Without fail, it was him. He lived about 40 minutes away and always sounded cheerful, even when life was difficult. He would ask me the same questions every week. Did you take your medication? How did you sleep? Is anyone there with you? Then we would talk about sports, weather, work, and ordinary things. Before hanging up, he always told me he loved me. I was proud of those calls. I told friends about them. They reminded me that even after my wife passed away, I still had family who cared. At least that was what I believed. Everything changed one Sunday morning when my old friend Walter came to stay for the weekend. We had worked together for nearly 30 years, and after recovering from surgery, he finally felt strong enough to visit. That Sunday, my son called right on schedule. When he asked if anyone was there with me, I surprised myself. For the first time, I lied. I told him I was alone. Walter was actually asleep in the guest room, but for some reason, I did not mention it. There was a brief pause on the line. Then my son replied, "Good." The words sounded strange, not relieved, not casual, satisfied. The conversation continued normally, but that single response stayed with me all day. Later that morning, Walter mentioned something odd. He had noticed my weekly pill organizer sitting on the bathroom counter. Saturday's compartment still contained a pill. That made no sense. I always took my medication first thing in the morning. When I checked, I found a round white pill that looked nothing like the prescription I was supposed to be taking. At first, I searched for innocent explanations. Maybe there had been a pharmacy mistake. Maybe I had mixed something up, but deep down, another possibility had already begun forming. A possibility I desperately wanted to reject. That night, I barely slept. I sat alone in the kitchen replaying 18 months of Sunday phone calls. The same questions, the same order, the same concern about whether anyone was with me. Then I remembered something else. Around the time those calls became a weekly ritual, my son had lost his job. He claimed he was doing fine financially. I had believed him. Now, I was not so sure. The next morning, I brought the mystery pill to my doctor. She sent it for testing and ordered blood work. A few hours later, she called with concerns. My potassium levels were unusually low. Not life-threatening, but low enough to explain months of fatigue, dizziness, and weakness. Then she asked a question that made my stomach tighten. "Has anyone else had access to your medication?" I drove home in silence. For the first time in my life, I considered the possibility that someone I loved might be harming me. A few days later, my son called again. He sounded completely normal. He even suggested visiting that weekend. I agreed, but this time I prepared. I bought a second pill organizer and carefully filled it with the correct medication. Then, with Walter's help, I placed a small camera in a bedroom closet facing the hallway outside the bathroom. I hated doing it. Setting up surveillance in my own home felt wrong, but I needed answers. Saturday arrived. My son came over for lunch. We talked, laughed, and watched part of a football game together. Looking at him across the table, I struggled to connect the man sitting in front of me with the fear growing inside my chest. He looked exhausted, stressed, defeated, not dangerous. After lunch, he asked to use the bathroom. He stayed inside for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally came out, he looked calmer somehow, a little lighter, a little less tense. A few hours later, he hugged me goodbye and drove away. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I rushed inside and checked the camera footage. What I saw shattered me. The video showed him entering the bathroom. A minute later, he cracked the door open and looked down the hallway as if checking whether anyone was watching. Then he disappeared back inside. He remained there for several more minutes, far longer than anyone needed. I took the footage straight to the police, explaining it was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Imagine sitting across from a detective and telling him you suspect your own child of tampering with your medication. Every word felt unreal. Part of me hoped they would laugh and explain why I was mistaken. Instead, they took the evidence seriously. Days later, the lab confirmed the mystery pill was not prescribed to me. It was a medication that could interfere with my existing treatment and gradually weaken my health over time. Then investigators uncovered something even worse. Because suddenly all those Sunday calls looked different. The concern, the questions, the routine. Instead of hearing a loving son checking on his father, I heard a desperate man monitoring a plan. The police eventually brought him in for questioning. I was not present, but I later learned enough to understand the truth. The pressure of unemployment, debt, and failure had slowly consumed him. He convinced himself he was trapped. He convinced himself there was no way out. Somewhere along that path, he stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as an answer to his problems. That realization hurt more than anything else. Months have passed since then. The legal process continues and our relationship will probably never be what it once was. I still live in the same house. I still water the flowers my wife planted years ago. And every Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, I wake up automatically expecting my phone to ring. It never does. The silence feels different now, but it also reminds me of something important. Trust is one of the most valuable things we ever give another person, and sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of hurting us the deepest. I survived because of a small lie, one simple lie. When my son asked if I was alone, I said no one was there. For the first time in 18 months, I broke the routine, and that single moment may have saved my life.